you don't even like technically have to join, but like if you did, it would just make it like seem
Yeah,
more
yeah, no, of course, of
legit.
course. Wait, that's where I was thinking like after the fact. That's
Yeah,
perfect.
I was just thinking like, all right, rip it right now.
Oh wait, here we go. There we go.
All right. So, but technically, you don't even really need to say anything with the
Yeah,
headphones
yeah, yeah. I'm
because
just when you're a speaker, it automatically echoes, so I'm gonna do this. So just plug it in so that there's no echo.
all right, there we go.
Okay. I
Hopefully,
wonder how this
it's
sounds.
loud enough too, where like they can actually hear. But
Yeah.
either way, this isn't some crazy thing. We just trying to let the people eat on Twitter who might
Let
not.
the people eat.
Yeah. All right. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is just like, how did you get into like health in general and like your like education? Like, how does that, um, how do you kind of define your education versus like some of the stuff you're like incorporating on the side as far as like health, or are they one, like education and like health for you?
In terms of the content side of things, or just kind of how I think about it?
I'm trying to say like for education, like your schooling, and then like for like
Mm,
health, kind of like what you've like learned. Like, did you learn a lot of stuff through your experience, like going to college, or was it mostly like outside of that?
got it. Yeah. So, totally self-taught with all this stuff. It started based off of personal like need, which I think is a super common story that you see on our side of Twitter, right? Like you go to the doctor and they tell you that you have this thing and there's no solution for it. And for me, that was the skin condition called HS, which is a autoimmune condition, or thought to be an autoimmune condition. They're not really totally sure about it yet. Um, but when I got diagnosed at like 16, it wasn't too bad, and um, I didn't really even like tell anybody because it wasn't like noticeable. It wasn't something that was affecting my day to day. But the time I got to college, like when I would Google it and stuff, it would the the diagnosis was always there's no cure and it's only going to get worse with time, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? And that's a story that you hear time and time again in this health world. And I by the time I was like a freshman in college, I was starting to really weigh on me and I was freaked out, and I was noticing that it was starting to get a little worse. Um and I didn't know what to do, and I felt really lost in our island with that. And um that kind of opened the door to trying to research. I feel like I've been a bit of a rebel in the sense that like I never really liked being told what to do, or um I don't really I never really took people's words as gospel. So when the doctor told me there was nothing I could do and it was only going to get worse with time, um, I believed that for a couple years, but then I was like, maybe it's not true. And that just asking that question sparked this whole rabbit hole for me that led to ultimately the journey I'm still on, but the journey that probably lasted 3 years of trying to cure the autoimmune condition, which it's funny enough, like when you start in this world of health, like you have this perception that things are pretty complicated and that it's a scientific equation that all these very important and intelligent doctors are trying to solve. And if they can't solve it, what makes you think you can solve your condition? Like this type of thinking. Um, but really, what I noticed by taking the action to try to cure it was that it really was just returning back to nature in terms of what we eat, um, sunlight, just living a life that is a lot more in tune with how we're supposed to live. And once I started to do that, I noticed that things got a lot better. And obviously, that journey was not a straight line. And on that, you start to learn things like you get super dialed in with diet, and then you neglect sleep, and then you have a setback in that regard. But it's just understanding that the more you live in accordance to nature, the better health results you're gonna have. And returning back to that has been super helpful for me in my journey. Lucky to be in a spot where I was able to figure that equation out for myself.
Hmm. I highly relate to that. Just the whole aspect of like returning to nature. Because I know for me in the beginning in my health journey, it was more so like tell me what to do, like what is the protocol that I need for like my diet that I need to follow exactly to a T, and like if I follow that then I'll be healthy. And it was like the same thing with like sleep and then exercise in general, but now I kind of view it as like more so like what is it that you really want to get out of health, and more so like how do you get back to being like just the free living, and then like with that just being aligned with nature, because I think most of us are just kind of out of tune with just how much time we spend indoors and just like how much time we're on like on our phone like under blue light. So because of that, just getting back to the way that we used to live, like you said, is like the most important part of health. And then once you find that, all the other dominoes will start to like kind of fall into place. So I like that we both kind of found that same perspective on it. Do you
100%.
remember like the first podcast that you ever listened to in general about um, anything related to anything?
Hmm. You know what's funny is that like I don't have an answer to that question, but podcasts definitely have played a big role in this journey, and they were definitely the source of my education for a while. But um, just I have such a love for podcasts and podcasting, but that really stemmed from during that time. Look, like I was a freshman in college when I decided to make a change, and I was a sophomore in college when I actually got serious about it. So from about sophomore year and on, uh, I had a lot of trouble relating to the people around me in the sense that I had a bunch of friends, but no one valued the same things as me. Everyone was really valuing drinking, staying up late, um, going out and partying, and just living a lifestyle that wasn't in accordance to what I wanted. And um, that caused me to feel like I was on an island a bit at times. And I think I really leaned on podcasts in that time to be my sense of sanity and my sense of like, you're on the right path. And so I don't think I have one particular podcast, but just guys like Aubrey Marcus, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Paul Saladino, uh, Chris Williamson, these guys in this time in my life just like almost became like mentors and friends, and just gave me a fundamental understanding that like you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing. And they made me feel like I wasn't crazy when everyone else around me kind of made me feel that way, not explicitly, just in the sense of it was hard to find anyone that valued the same things as me. Um, and that's really how I got started with podcasting, was this desire to take part in those conversations. So don't have a great answer for you in terms of one particular podcast, but kind of just all those guys contributed greatly to that journey.
Hmm. I feel like for me, I had the same thing where we both had the same COVID experience midway through like our college, and I think that kind of threw a wrench into like everything that we knew. So specifically for me, like I was like in the fraternity scene and then kind of just like completely thrust into a different life, where then I started like listening to podcasts, and that made me change my perspective on a lot of things. But I always had this kind of like deep down knowing that like the whole like party scene was just not like, I don't know, it wasn't for me. And like I tried to join a fraternity and just be like, okay, like I'm gonna do it, and then it was not for me whatsoever. And it was very hard for me as well, where like I was in a fraternity and everyone else is valuing like drinking and just hooking up with girls, staying up late, and I'm over here trying to like wear my blue blockers at night
Yeah,
and
been there.
wear my whoop and try to track my sleep. So I can like highly relate to people like that on a podcast, um, where even though like in real life the people were kind of telling me like, hey, you're not fitting in, but like at the same time I was like, all right, like, well, in a few years, like where are they going to be at and where am I going to be at if I can continue to like pursue what's actually of interest to me? And now I try to keep reminding myself of that because now I'm like trying to travel and do other things that are of interest to me. And I'm like, hey, like 3 years ago, you would have like killed to be in the position you're at now. And like for so long, I was like even scared to like create a podcast and start creating online. So kind of just like reframing it to be like, like you put in all that work now, like in the past, so that you can be in this position now to actually like share and have value to give to people. So like you have no right but to like share that and just keep growing because like that process just never stops. I don't think so. I think that's kind of is that similar to like how you came up with your podcast name and like how you started getting into podcasting in general is just like the growth that you saw to yourself.
100%, dude. And just to build off that first point of what you said is, um, when you're that guy who's like a bit different in regards to the things that you value. Um, and one of the things that I didn't initially expect, and I was as well very similar to you in the fact that like I was a little embarrassed to be the guy who had the podcast or the guy who would was tracking his sleep and wasn't going out because he wanted to be in bed by 10 p.m. like this type of stuff. And um, I was real just embarrassed and insecure about that for a bit. And then as I saw that play out, I realized that one, people are so much more concerned about themselves than they are with you, and no one really cares in the end what you are up to. But the second part about that is like people love authenticity, and there's something to be said about being yourself. And there's an energy there that people can feel and they can sense, and they respect. And I think that a lot of people like that I initially wouldn't think would be like so supportive, or they're in this journey of just like being the different one, let's say. But you just notice that people love authenticity. And you also realize like when you're that guy who's not going to all the events because you want to be doing other things that you think are better with your time, you end up um your a presence becomes more of value because they see less of you. And it's like when you spend time with someone every single day, you almost get sick of that person, versus when you see them once a week or once every 2 weeks, it becomes a treat to see that person. Um, so that was just it's just a unique perspective to think like you make things in your head be such a bigger deal than in reality. And like starting a podcast is the perfect analogy for it. Like I think it's going to be this big deal that everyone's going to judge you so much on, when in reality no one really cares. And it's just a good reminder that we suffer so much more in our imagination than in reality.
100%. Even with for me, like just starting to like post online, I always thought people are just gonna like comment and just be like, "Dude, like you're such a bum," or I don't even know. I was just like scared that they were gonna like leave so many comments, and then like at first I was just like, when I started tweeting, it was just like, all right, you're just tweeting to no one. Like, it doesn't even matter because no one's even seeing it at first.
Fact.
So like you said, just all imagination and just not really like in reality as far as people like actually caring. Like, obviously, like down the road, like you want to have people that are caring about you, and like what you're putting out there. But I think it's all part of the process is to like go through those growing pains in the beginning where no one's really listening, so that when you get to that point down the road, you have something of value that you're sharing with people.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask you is like, since you started the podcast, do you think you've like, there's any like specific thing you think you've learned about yourself?
I think the art of listening is probably the greatest one. Um, I don't think I ever was really realized how much effort it takes to truly listen. We are so, in modern society, especially with phones and stuff, we're so passively consuming things and passively listening to things that we really struggle to genuinely hear somebody. And when you're truly listening, it's more of a meditation than anything else. Like the speaker or the person in your mind, that voice in your head is gone away. and you're fully entranced in what the person's saying. You're not thinking about where you're going to say next. And I don't think I ever knew how to do that before podcasting. But the beauty in podcasting is that it's such high stakes. Like, you have to think of something to say when they're finished saying it, and the
Yeah.
high stakes of it, especially when you're first getting started and you're just like a little bit lost and don't know exactly what you're doing. It really brings out this presence and this desire to listen that makes you become really good at it. And that skill has translated into almost every facet of my life, and my ability to communicate has just improved significantly because of it. And I don't think you need to be a podcaster to learn it, but you just have to bring this almost like this particular sense of awareness in how you listen, and you will start to kind of realize what I mean um, by this presence that brings out of you, and you start to have people open up to you in a way that they didn't before. It's very, very odd, and wasn't something I initially thought going into the podcast, but 100% has transformed my ability to communicate. And I think that it allows you to get a lot deeper with people, and it's been a great skill. And I think that everyone should take the time to even try to do something like a mock podcast, because, as you know, it helps your social skills and your communication skills so much that I think it's worth it for everybody to just hear themselves speak and to hear how they converse with somebody one-on-one in this situation, because it's a lost art. And in the modern world, like, there's very few times where it's you and me for an hour and neither one of us look at our phone or do anything else but have this conversation. And it's such a lost thing, and it's so fundamental to what it means to be a human. So finding ways to reconnect with that sense of communication and that dance and that art of a conversation is something that for me has been so nice and has provided such a sense of connection that I would love that for everyone to experience what that feels like.
Like that was like one of the reasons why I got into like listening to Joe Rogan so much, was just due to his like the nature of his podcast not being like so like pre-planned, kind of just like whatever kind of goes off the
Facts.
limb. So I think that's why he's like the goat of podcasting in general. So
Yeah.
do you think like do you try to recreate anyone with your podcast, or you kind of just try to do your own thing?
I love that question, by the way, because I think we all kind of have those people that like inspire us and shape the way that we speak and communicate, like, subconsciously. And when you start to record yourself, you start to realize it. Like, I used to listen to a ton of Tim Ferriss and his podcast. And when I was first starting my podcast and I would listen to the recordings, I noticed that I would say things that I got from listening to so much of Tim. And I don't think we realize how much the people we listen to affect the way that we communicate. But the guys that I really look to and try to emulate is a mixture of Rogan and um, Diary of a CEO. Why am I blanking on his name?
Been
Stephen Bartlett. Yes, of course. Which he is, to me, those two guys are just on a different level than everybody else. And um, I think Stephen always hits the mark, in meaning he gets across the message of what the person is trying to say so well and brings it out of them so well. And Rogan has this flow and this enjoyment to the conversation. And I would love to combine those two people together, because, Rogan is so go with the flow that sometimes he can miss the mark, and the person might come in with a certain agenda that they want to talk about, and they will never even come close to talking about it. Whereas Steven hits the mark and hits the mark so well, but doesn't have that same flow and ease that Rogan has. So I really try to just put those two things together. And to your point, like, I I've found, I didn't expect this going in, but the less research I do for a podcast, the better it goes, because you're just more present. And it's like, there was this one podcast that it was like the biggest guest I'd ever had, and I probably did like 15 hours worth of prep for it. I was
Mm.
listening to anything and everything they had ever put out there. And every single thing the person said throughout the episode, I was like, heard it before, heard it before.
Yeah,
and it messes with you to a level that like it just makes you so out of the moment in conversation. So there's such a beauty to being a bit unprepared, not in a degenerate sense, but in the sense of like you have maybe topics that you want to talk about, but maybe you just don't do as deep of a dive. So I think that people like think that you should do this extremely extensive research, when in reality, to get the best results, like sometimes it's less is more.
I feel like I could go so many ways with that, but I don't know. Just kind of thought of this idea where it's like sometimes people ask me like, "Oh, like what's your podcast about?" And I'm just like, why do I have to be about something? I'm just talking to someone. Like, are you not interested in listening already? Just like by the guess. But um no, I just think like kind of what you said on like the subconscious level, like that's why podcasts in general and like what you choose to listen to are just so important because you're basically just downloading like to your subconscious mind. And like every single time you're putting in like Jocko or like anyone like that, you're basically like establishing that kind of headspace for yourself. So that's why I think podcasts in general just have the power to like completely like overhaul your life if you can let it. Like just listen to them in like the gym or on walks. Obviously, like I think there's a point where you can just be like too stimulated and like you never like let yourself kind of just I don't know relax and just like go for a walk without headphones. But for me, I've always found like just more benefit, I think, from listening to podcasts and music. Like once I made that transition, I still think music has its place, but for me, like podcasts have been the go-to.
Me as well, man. Podcasting is such a beautiful thing to consume, but to your point, we can definitely overdo it. And I know for sure I overdo it at times and have a bit too much stimulation because um, although it's so great, you just sometimes you need to give yourself the space to be bored. And because the boredom is where a lot of creativity stems from. And if you want to come up with original ideas or great ideas, you need to allow yourself to have that time to just be bored and to let your mind wander. And it's such a thing that I think we all need to work on, and me as well. I think I struggle with that more than anybody else. But um, I mean, dude, there's such a beauty though to learning from a guy like Jocko and having that just seep into you because you can't go back. Like if you, I think the health stuff is such a good analogy for it. If you consume 5 hours worth of content on seed oils and all the danger of all these like processed foods and like what they do to you, um, you almost like your desire to eat them is kind of gone, but you're just never going to look at them the same way again. And having that ingrained in your subconscious is so powerful. So all the stuff of just self-education with podcasting in particular, I think it just fundamentally changes who you are as a person.
Yeah, I do think though, like there's obviously like lines to it. Like you don't want to be too neurotic about it. But now it's like I wake up and like I know in the past I would be like before I kind of like got into health and like looking at the sun in the morning, I was just like, all right, let me just like scroll on my phone.
Yeah.
And then now if I like do that, even though like maybe like once every like now and then, like I'll literally just like I don't know, I just don't have any discipline that day or
Yeah,
something
no,
happens.
happens.
But like in general, like I know in the back of my head, like, oh, you should probably just be out like getting your sun in and not being stimulated in the morning. So like if you hadn't consumed all that knowledge about the benefits of like getting in the sun and just like all the stuff it's gonna do for you, I think it just makes you way less likely to do habits that are like actually healthy. So that's why I think reinforcing like even though like when you are scrolling on Twitter or like Instagram or something, if you're consuming like health knowledge, I always think it's like more beneficial than just like I don't know what what other stuff you're gonna do. Because I know prior to me like getting into health, it was more so, hey, like what's the line on the spread for the game or like other like stuff like that. And I still think like I'm trying to come around to the place so like those still have their place to like enjoy, but like let's just not make it like the basis of our life.
Dude,
I don't know if
couldn't
you have
agree.
any like vices in the past that you got into or just any stories similar to like that.
Oh, dude, 100%. I mean, just to talk about the fact that like it's you almost, I think it's like 4 phases where first phase is you start to learn about these things and you start to consume the health content, let's say, and you start to make some changes, um, and then you get to a point where you're so neurotic about everything and you're like thinking about seed oils all the time, and you're doing just like you're refusing to eat all this stuff, and you are so like white knuckling everything so much, and there's no flow to it. It's so forced, and everything's just a bit of a difficulty. You're so concerned about what your food is, and there's a time and a place for that. But I really like this idea of like building resiliency within you. To the fact that like, okay, if I go out and eat with my family and there's some seed oils in the meal, I can enjoy that meal fully without freaking out about it and without leaving the table in the storm. Like you see some of these health influencers talk about like, um, there's just a time and a place to be incredibly disciplined, and there's nothing more unhealthy than being overly neurotic about your health and stressing out so much about every little thing. And at the end of the day, nothing kills you more than stress. And uh, the more the more you can live just an anti-stress, relaxed lifestyle where you are trying your best, but also going with the flow. It's not an easy place to get to, but ultimately, at least for me, I found that to be the best happy medium for for getting the positive side of the health stuff and not letting it control you.
Hmm. I think that's well put because like you still want to enjoy your life, and the whole reason you get healthy is to like enjoy those moments of joy, like whatever they are for you. And a lot of times for me, prior to like caring about health, I wasn't able to enjoy the like normal things just because of my health suffering. So I was just like depressed and
Yes.
all the stuff that goes with it. I'm curious as far as you, like you said, kind of like lowering your stress and kind of getting less neurotic about it. Did you have any specific like protocols that you considered like neurotic that you tried and then they maybe just didn't work for you and then you switched over to like something else that's like more inclusive or just like allowed you to stress less?
Yeah, I mean, so it was neurotic, but it was needed because I was trying to cure an autoimmune disease, right? So like,
Yeah.
um, it's a weird world. If like, I'm sure some people at the time would have like some health therapist or nutritional therapist or something would have said I had a eating disorder or something like that. But it's like sometimes you need to be incredibly strict, incredibly disciplined to get the results you want, especially when it's a health condition like that. So yeah, I mean, I was super strict and super neurotic about only eating meat, fruit, and vegetables for maybe 5 months, and it was this incredibly regimented elimination style diet, and it worked. I mean, it was a short-term solution, and the fact that like I can't maintain that forever, and by no means do I want, or did I want to, or do I want to. But yeah, it was a bit much, and over time that slowly evolves into this happy medium where you can have some ice cream here and there, or just enjoy life a bit more, and not be so freaked out about everything. And I think the lesson there is just understanding why you're doing something and understanding that what got you here won't always get you there. And that this if you are that person who has an autoimmune condition that you want to cure and you do this incredibly strict diet, understand that you're not going to be that person forever, and that it is a season of your life and a sprint in a sense. And um, that sprint is required, but with time, that is going to be more of a pace that's sustainable for you. And you only find that, I think, through doing it. And there's a lot of hiccups and reverses and going back, taking one step forward and two steps back at times. But ultimately, if you just keep moving in that direction, you're going to get to the place that you want to. So definitely was neurotic at times, but I think it was warranted. And I'm grateful to be in a position now where I don't feel like I have to be that neurotic, because like I like nightshades were a trigger for me. But since I've done so much work to like heal up my gut and work on inflammation management, like now I can have a slice of pizza or something and I know I'm not going to have a skin reaction, just because I built up that resilience in me. So I think it comes with time, and sadly I think at times you do have to be a bit neurotic if you're in a situation where you're trying to cure something. But um it's a weird line. It's a weird line to balance, and I don't think I have the best answer or solution to it. But I think with time, you find that way to balance it for yourself.
I think with part of the reason like you have to be neurotic though is just because of like all the things that are kind of thrown at you without you asking, as far as just like you go to school and most of the people are just like inside all day and it's just like not stuff that's interesting to you. And I think like that for me was one of the most negative things. I just remember being like overweight, and the only pleasure I could really get at the time was just like playing like video games and just like smoking weed, because I that's all I thought was like fun at the time. And then like when I did go to school, I was just like inside, like stuck, I don't know, like ripping caffeine right before school and like weed and just I don't know, I was just like misguided as far as like what was going to really bring me joy. And even like lately, I don't think I've really recognized the fact that like I don't know, just like lowering your stress in general is really like the key to health, because I was always just coming from this mindset that like I was overweight, so I was always like, oh, I need to just like clamp down and just
Mm-hmm.
let's buckle up. But it's like that is never going to be like the solution, because you're never going to be able to like sustain that for long periods of time. And then also just the fact that like your interests are going to change, so like you don't even know, like maybe like I don't know, you might pick up like a new sport that's going to be like something that's going to be pursuing you, or like another business interest or something. um so I was just wondering, like, do you have any like kind of similar things along those lines? Like, do you think you've ever like changed your interests like within this like last 3 to 4 years that you've kind of gotten into health, as far as like where you're aiming? Because I know for me, I was aiming towards like I don't know, like Goggins, like I don't know, like dark mode, and now I'm like, all right, let me just like stress so less that like I'm just enjoying life and not being depressed.
Oh man, I mean, it evolves so much. And I mean, I think back, like I think the best way to see this evolution is, I don't know if you've ever kept a journal, but journaling has been something that, looking back at and looking back at your inner thoughts of the person who you were in the past, has been so insightful in
Mhm.
understanding how much you have evolved. And I started journaling freshman year of college, at the beginning of that. And I mean, I was just such a different person than the guy I am today. And I take a lot of pride in that. And I was like, I just, I genuinely thought I was an idiot. Genuinely thought I wasn't intelligent. I thought I was just a spacey, lower IQ guy, whatever. I didn't like have a strong self worth in that regard. And turns out I was just a stoner with awful sleep wake patterns and had a shitty diet. And like, it's just the texture of my mind and the clarity of thought and the um, cloudedness I felt back then. It wasn't me, it was my habits. And to see the texture of your mind change so much over the years is such an important note, to understand that the person you are today isn't the person that you always will be, and you can change that person. And if you want to be the person that's viewed as insightful or intelligent, you just need to put in the work, and it's available to you. And I think for the longest time, I didn't realize how malleable these things were, and I thought that they were fixed. Um, But it turned out that a lot of these things that I viewed as a death sentence were very changeable with habits. And I think so I think freshman year, my where I was aiming, it's probably just like every other college student. I was just so average in every regard. Um, and that evolved to me trying to be this, like, I mean, it's hard for me to answer because I've never been somebody to make goals, because I find that I build things up so much in my head to the fact that, like, I build goals that are doomed to fail from the start because they're almost too big in the sense. And so, like, if I were to aim at something, it's almost like I'm aiming at an inachievable feat. And in that, I just, it feels impossible. And I feel like I've always done a lot better when I focus on the day and the habits.
Mm.
But yeah, to your point, like, maybe I wasn't aiming to be that David Goggins guy, but I was, my habits reflected a desire to be that guy for a long time. And now I probably have found that happy medium in a lot of aspects outside of just health, or outside of just dieting, I should say, where it's like my exercising now is just doing things that are more fun, and like lifting weights I love, and playing tennis as cardio is awesome, and um just enjoying the foods I eat fully, and the work that I'm doing, I'm excited to work hard for. And it's like these things are now, they're much more of a flow, and they're much more of something that's not me white knuckling it. And I think for a lot of my time in college, it was a white knuckling, and now it's more of a flow, but it's even more productive than it was back then. So, um, kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but definitely the aim has changed over the years, and I take a lot of pride in that. And I think that by focusing on your habits, you can do a lot in that regard to change the person you are.
Yeah. To just like reiterate, I feel like everything kind of changes once you start to like see a little bit of change within yourself, and then you start to recognize like, oh, I can do this, then let me do that a little bit further down. But I guess to get back to your point about just like white knuckling it, like how did you like white knuckle it then versus like what actually physically changed for you like back then versus now that you consider it like more of like a flow like experience? Like was it some sort of like influence that kind of like made you realize that, or just like was it yourself just recognizing you didn't have to be as strict on the way you like viewed life?
I think it's just time, and it happened um, more natural in the sense of, like, it would be it would be like you'd be so strict. To take a diet analogy, you'd be so strict on your diet for months on end, and it would be miserable. And then the one time you would decide to break that diet, you would go all out. You would go all out, and it was like this, um, almost like you would binge, and you knew that you had the sense that, like, I never eat ice cream, so I'm gonna eat the whole pint of ice cream.
Yeah.
So I think the more just like of a wave that is, and with time, the seas just begin to get more and more steady, and you start to realize that, like, it doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing all the time, and it could be more of this happy medium place that um, doesn't feel so extreme. And I think that a lot of people have this sense that it's all in or nothing. And a lot of times I think that's easier for your mind to understand and to do than moderation. I think extremism is a lot easier than moderation. And
Hmm.
so to find that moderation, it's a muscle like anything else. And the more you flex it, the more it becomes that flow, and it becomes easier to do. So I think it really just is time, and in continuing to use that muscle to get to that place where you can try the dessert and have one bite of it without being the guy who's eating the entire dessert, you know? So with time, I mean, it's such a cliche and bad answer, but for me, that's really been the solution.
Mhm. Getting back to your time, like when you were in school, how did you view that when you were kind of doing things that were like completely opposite to everyone else? Like, how did you, obviously, you said you listened to podcasts and all that, but like, how did you stick to it during that time? Like, for someone else who might be going through the same thing, like, what were the main things that you were able to like really wrap your mind around and be like, all right, this will be worth it in the end?
I think one, um, there's a quote from Taylor Sheridan, which is the creator of the show Yellowstone, and the quote is, "Most people fail in life because they fail to listen to the whispers." And I think that I was lucky enough for the whispers to be loud enough for me to hear them, in the sense that because of the autoimmune condition, my body was screaming at me to get right and to figure my shit out. And because of that, I had this sense of I had a sense that I needed to do this thing. And I felt it very deeply within me because I think there is a exercise from Jordan Peterson that's incredibly powerful. Um, and you take some time to first write out your ideal future, and that's the fun one. And you go in great detail in picturing what that would look like for you when you're 40 years old and you have a family. What would that ideal perfect picture be? And then you do the reverse of that, and you sit down and you do, what would my nightmare be if every single habit I have right now that's a negative gets amplified and compounded? Who is that person I become? And taking that really seriously and sitting down and being at a place in my life when I first did that activity where I had this autoimmune condition and I knew that diet and lifestyle and um, optimizing my health was going to be the thing that moved me forward in that direction. I could so clearly see that if I continued down the path of bad habits, I would be miserable, depressed, and I would not be a person that I would be. It was terrifying to think of the person I would be if all those habits compounded and the skin condition just continued to get worse and worse and whatever. Um, so having that thing that one you're running towards, that future that you're running towards, but also having a thing that you're running from. And there's the study that with rats where they pump these starving or they keep starving rats in a cage, and they pump the smell of cheese coming from one side of the cage, so that these starving rats start running towards the cheese. But then they had another group where they pumped the same smell of cheese, but they also pumped the smell of a cat coming from the other end. So they had something to run towards, but they also were having something they were running away from.
Mhm.
And the results of the study were incredibly significant to the fact that the rats that had something that they were running away from and something they were running towards were the ones that ran the fastest. And I think that holds equally true for us in the sense that you need to have that future and that thing that you're working towards. But I think it's equally as powerful, if not more powerful, to have a thing you're running away from. And, I had a conversation with a friend a few months back who was dealing with some bad anxiety. And he knew that I had healed my own skin condition. And we were just talking about it. And I told him that I'm at a place now where I could write a love letter to HS, my skin condition, and have that be a very genuine love letter because it's solely responsible for the person I am. And I told him that Like one day, if you keep doing things correctly, this anxiety that you view as such a negative, such a thing that's ruining your life, you will write a love letter to it because it's going to be the thing that ultimately makes you into the person you are. So I really think there's just so much power in running away from something.
I agree with that, and I feel like sometimes the greatest blessing, like you said, like is just getting something negative happen to you like earlier on in your life, because like you don't get to the point where you're like 29 or 35 and you have multiple kids and then you're like, all right, I need to change my life now. So it's almost a blessing that you're able to like kind of get this negative experience even though it's like
No,
horrible
it's
in
a
the
blessing.
moment.
It's a total blessing.
Yeah, but you're able to just overcome it, and then that gives you the strength to overcome like future problems that are likely to be not as bad as that one, because um, I don't know. I mean, they could be worse, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? You just
No,
have
I
more
mean,
strength on you.
it's like the obstacle really is the way. Like there's just such a there's there's just so much power in overcoming hard things and in doing something that feels unachievable, and in those dark nights of feeling miserable and not knowing if you're going to succeed, and then finally figuring out a solution to that thing and overcoming it. The person you are at the start of that journey versus the person you are at the end of it are two totally different people, and that's the reason why the podcast is called The Alchemist Library, is this process of alchemy, which is turning lead into gold. And we had this sense that the alchemists were people who did that in a physical sense, in genuine lead into gold. But there was also these guys that they called the spiritual alchemists, who talked about the self and turning the self from lead to gold. And it's through, if you look at this process of alchemy, it's through hard things that you become that person who becomes gold. And you, maybe the person you started out as, the card you got dealt, wasn't the ideal hand, and you are that piece of lead that is worthless. There is a way you can turn that into gold, and you just need to follow that process and be willing to continue to overcome hard things, and ultimately that's going to make you a person worthy of respect and a person that you're proud of. Excuse me.
No, I think that's a perfect way to kind of summarize everything that we talked about today. So thanks for coming on the podcast, man. How else can people like view your stuff and get to know more about you?
Ryan J. Ayala on Twitter, podcast, Alchemist Library. Brother, thank you so much for having me today. This was a blast.
Yeah, this is fun, man.
This was awesome. All right, sweet.
Peace.